This is Keys to the Shop, episode 333, Bridging the Professional and Home Barista Gap with Lance Hedrick of Onyx Coffee Lab. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. I am your host, Chris DeFirio, and I am excited to have you along today. As always, if you have not subscribed to the show, please do hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Just take a moment, put me on pause, and hit subscribe. You'll always be updated with new content like today's conversation with Lance Hedrick. And we have about 10 episodes that come out every month, so you're going to want to stay updated on all of that. And also, if you have the opportunity, share these episodes with a friend. Share the show with a friend or with your team. Sharing Keys to the Shop is the number one way to help this show and the information in it to spread. And I'm so thankful for all of you who have done exactly that. Now, if you're just getting into the coffee industry, trying to open a shop, and you need clarity and a trusted advisor along the path to build good foundations for success, or you're already an operator, but you want to improve something about your operations, you want to scale your business, solve some specific problems, that's where Keys to the Shop Consulting comes in. Keys to the Shop Consulting is where I get to work directly with you to help you build a fulfilling and successful coffee business or coffee career. There are a lot of ways that Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com, and we can set up a free discovery call and talk all about what's going on with you and your coffee journey and see if Keys to the Shop Consulting is the right fit. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode is brought to you by the Ground Control Cyclops Brewer from Voga Coffee. This is the game changer. This is it. This is where coffee goes. When we're talking about batch brew coffee, sometimes we don't talk about it with an enthusiastic tone, but when you talk about batch brew coffee made by the Ground Control, I think, the conversation changes, because if you've had coffee off of this machine, you know that the possibilities are nearly endless for the kind of flavors you can extract and the control you have over those extractions. It's all thanks to the SCA award-winning technology that not only makes this a next-level batch brewer, but also makes it a machine that delivers efficiency because it makes tea, batched iced lattes, batched cold brew. So there's that versatility plus a level up in quality. You can't go wrong. So visit them over on their website, groundcontrol.coffee. You can learn where there's ground control machines near you, read testimonials, and experience this for yourself. I think if you're looking to showcase your coffee to its utmost ability to your customers, then you should look into getting a Ground Control Cyclops brewer for your cafe. Again, visit their website, groundcontrol.coffee. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Barista series from Pacific. This is the line of plant-based performance beverages that is known and loved by people who know and love plant-based beverages because they love the best. These are the professional's choice of product because they are created for professionals. They're created with the barista in mind and with the feedback of the community. So every beverage in the extensive Barista series lineup will stand up to the heat from steaming, deliver you an amazing texture, perfect for latte art, and also keep the taste balance of the beverage focused on coffee. Your customers are absolutely going to love this. Check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com. Get this in your store and try it for yourself. I think you'll be impressed, and so will your customers. Again, if you're looking for the best in plant-based beverages to serve your customers, it needs to be the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, today we get to have a conversation with somebody who has made quite a name for himself in the coffee industry by delivering accessible coffee education and training through his YouTube channel, and long before that, working throughout the industry as a trainer, and that is none other than Lance Hedrick. Lance has been in the coffee industry for a little over a decade now. Before coffee, though, Lance was a PhD student who was already deep in academia with the goal of one day becoming a professor. When he got his first job in coffee and discovered the world of coffee competitions and specialty coffee, he traded that pursuit for the pursuit of coffee science and equipment and training. And I think we're all glad that he did. In his time working in coffee, he's worked the bar, of course, as a barista. He's worked in kitchen, bagging coffees, deliveries, roasting, quality control, managing, consulting, bar design, servicing equipment, and training. It's been a tour de force in terms of his experience throughout his career, and he's currently in his role of overseeing wholesale for the West Coast and international accounts for Onyx Coffee Labs. As a competitor, Lance has won over 30 latte art throwdowns. He's a 2-time Coffeefest latte art world champion and has won 3rd and 2nd place in the US Brewers Cup Championships. And on top of all that, he's been able to be a coach to US Barista champion Andrea Allen in the Barista Championships since joining Onyx Coffee Labs in 2018. Now, all of this experience that Lance has been funneled into the creation of his popular YouTube channel, where he breaks down the complex world of coffee and coffee equipment to make enjoying the best coffee possible accessible to all, bridging the gap between the professional and the home barista, and is really taking off. And in our conversation today, we're going to be diving into the story of Lance's genesis in the coffee industry, how he developed his approach towards coffee through his experiences, how the YouTube channel was started, as well as his thoughts on the need for coffee education and training, both for baristas and home enthusiasts, and his advice for how we should embrace the exploding consumer market as professionals. Lance, of course, has a lot to share here, and I think you're going to get so much from it. So without anything further from me, let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with Lance Hedrick. What's up, Lance? Welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you?
Doing well. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great. I did a little Lance impersonation there. Did you like it?
I really did like it. I'm a big fan of the impersonation.
That's great. Yeah. I didn't work on it very hard, but I'm really glad to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Just sitting and sipping some coffee while taking a break from emails.
I'll bet there's a lot of that stuff. Yeah. You're a busy guy.
I try to stay busy.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm excited to talk about a lot of things today, not the least of which is your channel. But before that, just kind of getting into your story. Obviously, what you've experienced in the industry has led you to where you are today. And yeah, I think that's a great place to start as we break into this topic today. Tell us a little bit about how you got your start in coffee and kind of what shaped you the most as you began in the coffee industry, and what were you doing before?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's rewind to 2014. I had just graduated undergrad in May, and that summer I was planning on proposing to my then girlfriend. For later that year, I decided I needed to find some sort of job that was flexible enough for me to live where she was living while also commuting to graduate school. And so during the summer, I kind of took some time off because I just finished undergrad and kind of just regrouped during the summer and was considering my opportunities. I spoke with a mentor of mine who was also a professor at the university I went to, and he suggested I look at the local coffee shop in the small town in Arkansas where I was living. Luckily for me, I had a stacked hand at that coffee shop. The current manager who was about to leave was a past suite mate of mine. And then the manager who was filling in his shoes was someone that I had traveled to Africa with and who was just a really good friend of mine. And so I kind of had a stacked hand, even though I didn't really drink coffee at all. I was an occasional Keurig sipper because one of my roommates had a Keurig. But normally I would throw down 5-hour energies. So I didn't even really drink coffee, but he said it was flexible, that it was all part-time jobs essentially, and they could work around my schedule really well. So I listened to his advice. I went and applied, and now, just for background, this shop is kind of the place to work in Searcy, Arkansas. It's called Kibo Midnight Oil, and it is where everybody wants to work. And so when I applied, whenever spots open up, everyone rushes in their applications. There were over 40 or 50 applications for 2 barista spots, and I did not turn in my application and everything on time. I just filled in an application and did not send in a resume or cover letter or anything else because I was stupid, and ended up getting an interview anyway because, like I said, my hand was stacked. Very privileged there. Then I went in for the interview. The interview did not go very well because my past suite mate, whom I thought was like, oh, this will be easy, he actually didn't think I would do a good job there because I he was like, well, I've been a sweet mate. I found this out later. His whole logic was, well, I've been a sweet mate, and he's kind of scatterbrained. He does well in school, but he's a last minute type person. I just don't think he would do very well in a coffee shop setting. But thankfully, the other person who's about to become manager fought for me. So anyway, long story short, I ended up getting the job, started in the fall of 2014 at this traditional coffee shop that served very second wave coffee. And for reference, the coffee costs about $5.50 a pound roasted. So very, very cheap commodity style coffee. But that's where I started. I started sipping maple lattes after I moved on from vanilla chais. And then I got, one of the things that you had to do to work on bar was pour, basic latte art. And so I was actually able to pour a, somewhat decent Rosetta after 2 weeks, which shocked the manager, my friend. Anyway, about a year in is when I had my first sip of specialty coffee, which was actually a naturally processed Ethiopia Hambala Buku from Onyx. And the rest, as they say, is kind of history.
All of us have had a place where happenstance has led us into something that turns out to be, our fate, or, something that we couldn't even imagine, like you wouldn't have imagined at that time that you would end up where you are today. And that's probably true for a lot of us in the coffee industry, because the career paths are not necessarily marketed for the average person to see. So, you got this job that, led you to progress into deeper coffee appreciation, though it was second wave and then the third wave coffee, so to speak. From there, it seems like you would make a decision that you're going to pursue coffee at a certain point. Like, it's not just a job at this point. It's something that's interested you to the point where you would abandon your career in academia to pursue a career in coffee. At what point did you realize that that's the choice that you needed to make, and how soon were you comfortable with that choice after making it?
So I am very much a fly by the seat of the pants type of person. I am very impulsive, like incredibly so. And I'm someone that doesn't need a long time to, I guess, make a decision. Once the logic is laid out in front of me, or once something like clicks and makes sense, I don't need to sit and ruminate over it. I trust that and pursue. So it's actually kind of interesting because it was a very quick decision. So I was really into latte art, and then I started an Instagram in mid 2015. I'd never had social media prior to that. I was one of those granola type people. I had a flip phone until I was robbed at gunpoint in Little Rock, Arkansas, back in 2015. And so I had a smartphone, and someone convinced me to start an Instagram. I'd never seen latte art outside of that tiny coffee house in Searcy. I'd never been to a specialty shop, even a year into working there. And so I started an Instagram and realized I wasn't the best thing since sliced bread. In fact, I was pretty cruddy. And the first account I followed was Ben Morrow out in Australia, and immediately began to replicate everything I saw him do. And then I found like Junichi Yamaguchi, Daisuke Tanaka. And then I fell into like the American style with Nicely and Maxwell Mooney and Twiz. So I got super obsessed with latte art. Did my first competition December of 2015, which I actually made top 4 of. It was a big 32-person throwdown at Onyx. I drove 4 hours to attend. And then I did another one up near Onyx in January. And then the very next one I did was actually New York Coffee Fest in 2016. To this day, I think is still the most stacked bracket of all time. That's where you had Yusuke Ota, you had Nobumasa Shimoyama, and you were there as a judge. I lost to Kunya Naba, who was fresh off of a 3rd place finish, and you were the only one to vote for me.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, I had underfilled the cup, and the other 2 judges took off for that, and you said that the design was superior, so the underfilling didn't matter. But so it was that week, and the reason I bring up the New York Coffee Fest is it was then that made my decision. So little did you know, as a judge, before coming to New York, I'd actually spent 2 weeks in England, about 12 days in England, interviewing at different schools for my PhD program. And I actually spent about 3 or 4 days with a professor that I still am obsessed with. I think he's brilliant. His name is Dr. Ward Blanton. But I went out there to interview with him specifically because I wanted to write my thesis underneath him as my primary. So he was at Kent. He's now at Yale. But Anyway, I went out there, spent a couple of weeks interviewing at schools, specifically in Canterbury with him, and had an incredible time. I mean, I like walked to the beach with this person I admired so much. I'd read all of his literature. We spoke about what a potential thesis could be. We were talking about, it was like the snobby academic's dream, right? And so I was just having a gale old time. We sipped cappuccinos on the beach. It was wonderful. And then I flew back to New York. That was my layover, was in New York. And I just, when I knew I was going to England at that time, I just got my return flight to be delayed. So I had like a 3 or 4 day layover in New York. And so I competed in Coffeefest after being 2 weeks in England. While I was in England, I went and poured with Don Temang, who's like an 8-time UK Latte champion. I had a practice evening with him. And while with him, he showed me rainbow latte art. I promise I'm not just rambling. This all connects. He showed me that rainbow latte art trend. And at the time, I'm pretty confident when it was trending, I was the first one in America, or the first American to do it the way that he had been doing it, which is with multiple colors. And anyway, my video I posted at his shop, Karakoli, at the time went viral. Instagram within a month would go on to feature my account as a top 5 coffee accounts, up with Dreet and Alcella and Junichi and a couple others. And so I was out there experiencing this like dream for someone who's pursuing academia. And then at the same time, I'm like geeking out with this latte artist that I was, obsessed with, and was getting featured on Instagram, and, that dopamine hit when your Instagram's blowing up. So then I come back to New York with all of these coalescing events, and I'm competing in my first ever world championship. I'm about 1.5 years into coffee, and I meet all of these people that at the time were like idols to me. I was like, it was like meeting Junichi is like meeting Justin Timberlake, right? His presence. He was like, for someone who had never gone to any type of coffee event, meeting someone that I had like, idolized the work of, like as an artist, it was very overwhelming to meet all of these people, like, Cabell and yourself, and Nicely wasn't there, but, I had 2 of the 3 triple winners in the same building. Wood and Camper was there, everyone. That was just such a stacked bracket. It was incredible. And it was the first time I'd ever been to some sort of big gathering of coffee pros from around the world. Before that, I had only been exposed to my local shop, and then the 2 times I went up to Northwest Arkansas where I experienced Onyx. So that it was I had a very microcosmic view of the coffee world, and going to Coffeefest, especially following the little London shops I went to in Winchester and all those places, it was an incredible experience to be able to compare in this juxtaposition between a potential future with academia and a potential future with coffee. And the week after Coffeefest, I kind of sat and decompressed it all and realized that I had been growing ideologically further and further from the school I had been attending. And was rapidly changing the approach I was wanting to do for my doctorate. And on top of all that, I had realized that the stresses of academia, especially in the niche field that I had been pursuing, which was growing at the time, it kind of started, I guess, as a recognized kind of small niche back in like the mid to late 2000s. I realized that my career would be marked with a lot of tiresome back and forths with people in other fields to, stand up and defend what we had been doing. Anyway, it seemed tiresome. It seemed incredibly political. Hearing the woes of the professors that I visited as far as like job security and how often it just seemed like a whole lot. And at the time, a coffee was just more exciting. And it seemed that when I went to Coffeefest and went to the booths and met with these equipment dealers, that there was a whole world that was untapped right at my fingertips. That seemed very intriguing. So literally that week, I called, I had 6 more hours left of my master's, literally 2 classes. I called in, dropped out of those classes, and pursued coffee full time. And the weekend after I dropped out of everything happened to be SCA in Atlanta. And I saw online there was a latte art throwdown that was being held at Revelator with a $1,500 grand prize. And that was an 8-hour drive. So I dropped out of my grad school on that Wednesday. The next day I got my wife and we drove 8 hours to Chattanooga, where my parents live. The next morning, we drove 1.5 hours south with them to Atlanta. I competed in the throwdown. I ended up beating Stephen Lim and Simeon Bricker, and a few other past champions. That was my first ever win, was $1,500 in like a 48-person bracket. That to me was, I don't know, I'm not someone to believe in signs, but it was definitely a nice marker to kind of confirm the decision I had made. Though at the time, how silly of me to believe a Latte art win was any type of confirmation. But at the time it was. I felt really confident in my choice, and I felt, I was skilled in the craft and that I had a lot to pursue. And so that was kind of, that all happened within about a 3-week period. Long story short, I went to London, went to New York, and then I dropped out of school and pursued coffee.
Nice. Well, the heart wants what the heart wants, right?
That's right.
In some way. And it's interesting, I think, if we're thinking of academia, we do kind of conjure up the image of dry and calculated. It's just like this area where you wouldn't think that somebody would just be attracted to something in, like coffee and latte art competitions and drop all of that. But it is actually somewhat related, considering that your fascination with a subject is the reason why you were pursuing academia, and
yep.
as you change and your interests change, it makes sense for you to explore that thing that was revealing itself to you. And I think for a lot of us, I know myself especially, my beginning in coffee was very much related to, latte art in many different ways. And, interestingly, we both share a commonality in that we're past latte art competitors who's have a son named Roman, which is interesting. That's
Roman Oliver.
Yeah, Roman Oliver. In fact, the middle name Oliver, that was, speaking of signs. But the point is that, when we are in the coffee industry, it's hard to legitimize our choices sometimes because it's compared and contrasted to well-worn paths of careers. And the more people like you who were at the edge of, or, arguably in those careers could, make these decisions, the easier it is for others to kind of follow in that path and say, no, I don't have to be as insecure about my decision to pursue this because it's becoming more, it's becoming more legitimized, if I could use that word, as if it wasn't legitimate already. So it's really awesome to hear that, all in a span of 3 weeks, you decided to make this switch. Now, you went on to win scores of competitions, twice at the Coffeefest World Latte Art Championship Open, and, in the top 3 many times. And beyond that, working at the various coffee bars and coming in, it was second and third in the US Brewers Cup. And all of that competition while working in coffee, where did you start to develop a desire to pursue becoming an educator beyond where you were in the coffee bar and beyond the stage of competitions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it actually initially was kind of thrown on me, and I'll explain that. So back as I referenced earlier, I got featured by Instagram, and that's initially how my Instagram got large-ish. It ballooned up to like 17 or 18,000 followers. And that was before winning anything. And then as time progressed, I ended up moving to Memphis, and the Instagram kept growing as I kept posting latte art. I started working for a roaster there, and then I also would pull shifts at 2 different coffee shops to make ends meet because my wife was in grad school. And then we found out we were pregnant, and we were like, oh no. This was not planned. How are we going to survive? So we made the decision that, I was just going to work my butt off so that she could continue going to school without having to take on extra work so that, she could have as normal pregnancy as possible. So I was pulling multiple jobs to make ends meet. And as my name was getting around that I was kind of in the Southeast area, and especially after I won my first Coffeefest, there was an email blast went out from Coffeefest, with all the winners. And when my name was on that top spot, people, especially back then, much less nowadays, and I say that as if it's a long time ago, coffee shifts so quickly. But even in 2016 or 2017, whenever it was, coffee, latte art was such a I don't know, such an important thing for shops to like want to be able to develop and serve customers. And so I was actually getting requests to come train. And so my desire to train actually came from that need. It started at Midnight Oil. I was asked to be the trainer, but it's mostly because I had by and far the best milk texture, because no one really cared. I mean, we cared about extraction, but more so it was that traditional, make sure the crema was nice and thick, so we use such low quality coffee. But then as I transitioned to Memphis and started working in specialty, obviously those mindsets shift. And so as I was being requested to come and do trainings, I really started to dive deep into all aspects of coffee. I got obsessed with barista hustle, of course. My past manager gave me all Scott Rowell's books at the time, which was like Everything But Espresso, a barista's handbook, those things. So I would read all these things, and I would follow as many Instagram accounts as I could that were showing, testing and anything I could see that was as legitimate as possible. And so I started diving down the rabbit hole pretty deeply as I was getting requested for trainings more and more. And the roaster I was working for, I would train wholesale accounts. And anyway, so it was kind of thrust upon me. But as I dove into the world of the minutia of coffee, I got obviously more and more obsessed. I'm a very passionate person. I'm sure that comes off in my demeanor pretty often. I hyper focus frequently to the chagrin of my wife, but I have so many hobbies. It's kind of difficult to follow. Thankfully, most of them center around coffee nowadays. But anyway, yeah, that jump into training, it kind of was thrust on me, and then I developed, I guess, that skill and sharpened it as time went on, and then it really, really, truly heightened beyond training baristas once I came to Onyx. And honestly, once COVID hit is when it really kind of blew up.
Well, let me ask you then about that point between you getting asked as a latte artist to be a trainer for latte art predominantly. A lot of people do this. They get thrust into that position because of a skill set, a very narrow skill set. And then they have to learn the other parts of that skill set as they go. How did you manage the transition between, being, I don't want to say a one-trick pony, but hired almost like that in some cases, to becoming a more well-rounded trainer? What were some of the challenges in like discovering those areas where you needed to grow, and also discovering the areas that other people needed you to be skilled in beyond what they had hired you to do?
Yeah, so early on, I knew I didn't want to be seen as the one-trick pony. I would say about a year into starting my Instagram, I had realized I realized there was more to coffee than latte art. And again, I want to reiterate, I worked at a traditional shop, so like taste was just abysmal. At least for me. I don't want to, for other people, maybe you enjoy that. It tasted, I just could not dig the coffee. It was, I don't know. I just enjoyed pouring latte art, and that's what brought me, a soothing moment in my shift. So I will say, though, I began drinking specialty frequently because the manager who hired me and my friend who now lives in Italy, he would have a tip jar in the back where baristas, if they wanted to, could put tips in, and he would as well. And we would buy nice bags of coffee with it for just us in the break room or in the back office. We would brew for each other. We would chat over it and dissect coffees. And he taught me pour overs. So he had like every pour over device you could imagine. And I'll be honest, I'm still good friends with him, but he definitely thought he knew a lot more than he did. I thought he was the god of pour overs. And I listened to everything he said, and I did it all exactly as he said. So I actually thought I knew a lot at the time, having read Rao's books and having been trained by this guy on pour overs. I actually felt like I knew a ton. So I would teach with a lot of confidence, and, I'm sure it was making decent cups, but I had not yet developed my own skill set. It was more so just by osmosis. I absorbed what he was teaching me and regurgitated it. And so I had a lot of confidence. I began writing a training manual when I came to Memphis, and then I started a shop called The Hub in Memphis. And that's where I think really began to take seriously what I was teaching, because I was kind of responsible for the shop's sales. And that's when I dove deeply into online research, I guess. and started to like decipher between what was fact and what was, as the kids say, cap. And yeah, so that's where I really started to get into everything. I was hired because of my latte art skills, but people were expecting me to train everything. So I had to begin compiling all the skill sets that I already had, as well as the knowledge that I thought I had, and refine that into kind of like a training curriculum of sorts. So that all began once I really started to do some slight traveling for it. I began to be asked to attend throwdowns in different coffee events because I was like a very minor Instagram like known person back then. Nowadays, I'm known for a different thing, but yeah. So it kind of started once I started that shop and was doing more travel trainings, and then really picked up when I moved to Onyx. Because I was kind of myopic in my approach. I think I still was at the very tip of the iceberg with coffee. I came up and Dylan and Alika at Onyx. If people don't know them, Dylan was the 2017 Brewers Cup champion. Alika as a coworker and just got third in the World Championship this year. They had very differing ideologies to what I was exposed to with barista hustle and with things like that. And so then I started to learn how different approaches could be and how they can affect coffee differently in the cup through just different proposed extraction theories and whatnot. So once I got to Onyx is really where it went from, like, I would say I was probably cruising in a school zone at like 25 miles an hour, and then I hopped on the highway. Once I came up to Onyx, that's when I was truly exposed to decades of coffee background.
At that point, you're starting to pick up more signal from the noise, and you're formulating somewhat of a, I don't want to say a universal theory of coffee, but a more well-rounded view that you could teach with confidence that's not born from being, young and naive in coffee, because, I've definitely had my fair share of training moments where I was just, evangelistic about things that I was completely wrong about at the time. And I think that's an interesting thing to kind of zero in on, because so much of the content that can be consumed about coffee, whether you're a barista learning from an educator or a consumer learning about coffee from people like yourself, you're kind of subject to the story arc of the educator, where you don't know if you're getting them on the day where they are just passionate but wrong, or whether you're getting them on the day where they've eaten some humble pie and have a more well-rounded perspective. And so when it comes to, putting up a platform like your YouTube channel, I wonder, how did you approach what you wanted to do there so that you could present information in a way that wasn't sort of like, it was dependable, it was reliable, and people could know that they're getting good information, not just, information born from passion, but not necessarily being informed?
Yeah. So once COVID hit, Breville reached out to Andrea and myself and asked if we would be willing to teach like beginner's espresso and stuff for home people that just wanted to learn. They didn't have to have a Breville machine or anything, but it was just a way to keep a connection with home enthusiasts, I guess. And so we did that as Onyx. We offered these classes. And so honestly, we started right like at the end of March or early April in 2020 doing these. It was a very quick turnaround after everything shut down. And so we started these classes that we were doing weekly, and they were gaining momentum. More and more people were taking it. They were quite fun, doing a little back and forth with Andrea. My goal every class was to make her break her professional gaze and laugh. And so that it was a lot of fun. But what that forced me to do was learn how to dilute messages to even the most basic of home enthusiasts, someone that uses a scoop to fill their portafilter of pre-ground coffee, how to dilute complex information into the little segments that I was allowed to have over a screen, while still being amenable to this intense content while also being entertaining. So what people call like edutainment. So over the next year and a half, we did a lot of those, and then William Sonoma kind of picked us up, and we were teaching for Williams Sonoma through their channels using Breville, since they sell Breville, to teach people how to make coffee at home. We would do, foundations of espresso, milk steaming, latte art, precision brewing, like on the like batch brew stuff, filter coffee. So over that year and a half, I was exposed to being in front of a camera on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, and was learning how to speak to a camera as opposed to a person, like I was so used to in my previous life, pre-COVID, where I was training people hands-on all the time. I traveled for Onyx and would train our accounts all through 2018, 2019. In 2019 alone, I went to LA like 8 times. I went to Denver twice, went to Portland 4 times. Like, I traveled all the time training shops, and then boom, COVID hit and everything was online. It was a very different world. And so after about a year, it was actually right at a year of doing that, I was like, I don't want this to be hidden behind any sort of paywall. This information I have gleaned and I've discovered and I've pushed for the past 6-7 years or however long I've been in coffee. I want this to be accessible to everyone, and not just people who can afford a class, not just people who can afford a trainer. And actually, the original intent was for the barista who might have a shop that they don't have a trainer, or their trainer just left and they don't have any direction, or for people who want to be equipped to go for better jobs. Because a lot of places, thankfully I don't see this much anymore, but some places used to require SCA certification to become a barista, or a certain amount of hours of requirement, yada, yada, yada. And so what I wanted to do is create an online curriculum that anyone could get their hands on for free. And so I had access to a friend who, had a decent camera set up, and I was like, let's just do this. I'll make kind of the foundations as YouTube videos. We'll see how they do. I made the steaming milk video, the ultimate guide to latte art, the espresso parts 1 and 2 they're all geared more towards baristas in a cafe, because I don't really go in depth into the science. They're more so best practices for a cafe, as well as for home baristas who just want a good espresso. And then as those videos took off, I realized that I could continue to produce content that was more than just the basics. It seemed, even though the original intent was for the barista who couldn't afford a trainer or wanted more opportunity but didn't necessarily have the education, I realized that the majority of my following was actually home baristas, and honestly, a lot of baristas who were looking for even higher education than just the basics. And so I began to pump out more intense guides and tutorials and reviews of different things that I thought people would enjoy. And after that, it just kind of took on a life of its own. And that's the ongoing story.
Yeah, it must have been really surprising, or maybe not, that consumers versus professionals were gravitating towards your videos. I mean, was that surprising, and did it change how you approached video creation?
Yeah, I think it convoluted what I was trying to do. So I got invited to a lot of these intense home forums, and I realized that there's actually a lot more educated coffee people who are home baristas than there are baristas in shops. But then once I sat and thought about it, it actually made perfect sense. Baristas, for the most part, as you're well aware, are underpaid, underappreciated people who aren't really valued very highly. It's driven in their minds that they are replaceable. And so what is the impetus for them to continue their coffee education outside of their job when they're not being compensated for it? So whereas baristas are being paid lowly to come in, dial in, and do what they need to do to make the shop ascend, they're sitting there thinking about, going home and doing their hobbies like playing guitar or playing video games or going to a park with a friend, rock climbing, walking their dog, etc. Whereas people who are engineers, people who are, whatever vocation they have, they're at work slumming away at what they did for, that they have their degrees in, and they're thinking about their hobby, which happens to be coffee. So you have these people who are putting all of their time and effort into their passion, their hobby, learning more and more about coffee and reading all of the literature, the scientific papers, and learning how machines work on a more intense level. And so once I thought about it, it wasn't very shocking that these electrical engineers, chemical engineers, et cetera, and even people without those jobs had the time and the energy to put into this passion, whereas baristas were they have a lot more tasting experience, but they don't know, at least from my experience in training, probably thousands at this point of baristas, there was just a huge education gap there. But it's not because there wasn't an enthusiasm on the barista's part. It was a lack of time to sort through all of the materials that maybe the home enthusiast had time to do. So then my focus kind of shifted on, all right, well, let's take all of this information. I have a heavy academic background. I studied, I couldn't decide in undergrad, and I studied everything. I had 160 hours at undergrad of both science and philosophy. And so I decided I was going to go out and digest everything I could on the engineering behind machines, tinkering with machines, understanding as much theory scientifically, chemically as I could behind extraction and all these other things. And I was going to make videos that made these ideas accessible and that were trustworthy for baristas to be able to hop on and not have to trudge through all of the minutia in order to get this education that maybe home baristas are trudging through the mud to get. So it did kind of shift my perspective a bit once I made that realization. And so now, I'm pretty consistently rummaging through Home Barista, rummaging through Espresso Aficionado Discord, and learning from these people who are much more qualified to speak on the engineering of machines or what exactly is going on in some of these processes that I might not have time to look into or rummage through or, dissect a machine to understand. And so I've learned to have an appreciation for both sides. There is still a huge gap though. And I do want to make this point clear because baristas may hear this and be offended or whatever. Baristas still by and far can taste coffee loads better than the home enthusiasts. I see a lot of the coffees home enthusiasts are raving about, and a lot of times I've had some of the coffees and they're either defective or low, something that, I'm calibrated with multiple professionals and might be low scoring or whatever it might be. And baristas, in my experience, have much more taste experience. So there's, on one end, you have high taste experience and capability of dialing in quickly, but not much education as far as, how thermostability is important for certain phases of extraction or where certain compounds, brew colloids, et cetera, come out, yada, yada, yada. And the home enthusiasts know all that, but may not have the best palate because they're brewing 4 or 5 cups a day, whereas a barista is tasting 100 a day. So both sides bring a lot to the table. And I think I'm trying to just kind of straddle that divide and bring people over to the other side's perspective, as well as to the other side's strengths.
As you're talking about that, I'm reminded of all the common refrain of, well, I wish they had taught us this in school. When you're in school, they teach you all the stuff that maybe they should, that you don't necessarily need to live a fulfilling and thriving life, but it's just facts and things to get you through, to get the grade. And for baristas, sometimes that's just the way the job is. Do the job, do the stuff, dial it in, like you say, and then the education comes when you're not in school. It's like, when you separate yourself from where you're supposed to be educated, then you get educated. So it, makes sense. And I love that you're kind of bridging that gap between the two, because there's a lot of love lost for specialty coffee in the barista community simply because of the drudgery or the improper work conditions and things like that.
Yeah. And that's such a motivator for me is once people are more well equipped, they have more opportunities. And that's the thing. And better than most, getting a livable long-term job or salary or wage, whatever it might be in the coffee industry is very difficult. If people ask me a lot, how do you get a long-term position in coffee? And I'm like, a lot of it is based in luck, or a lot of it is based in right place, right time, lucking into being with, a certain company or with a certain person or whatever it might be. There is a lot of that sprinkled in. And so it's difficult. But one thing that will certainly help anyone's cause is education and being able to prove their, worth. Or for instance, if someone knows how to work on machines because there's in-depth videos that they can teach themselves on how to do it, that is a huge asset for a shop or for a company. Tech services are greatly needed. If someone is able to be on the quality control team because they understand tasting really well because there have been great guides, that's a huge asset. The more someone can bring to the table, the more they are wanted or valued, I should say. Their value proposition increases tenfold. And so it's a lot of what I'm doing is motivated by this idea of equipping people. And I've had actually a lot of people say, they went out. Actually, I had someone reach out to me from a reputable place in San Francisco saying that someone came in, had never had any coffee experience, but they trained themselves from my tutorials, and they were the best applicant. They had the best texturing. They had the best extraction principles. They could pour latte art. They understood how coffee worked and ended up getting the job over people who did not have or who did have experience. And so that was very edifying, obviously, for me to hear that. But it's stuff like that. I'm just trying to equip people to be able to bring something more to the table than if they were to just, be trained at a shop by a trainer who was trained in a couple of hours by someone else.
Right, exactly. So now that barista that you're talking about, for example, gets the job, and then it's really up to the people who employ that barista to take what they, would say they value and use it or not. Like if I value that somebody has those skills, reasonably, I might want to put them in a place where they would either grow in those skills or use them to help other people grow in those skills. And, we're talking about baristas and we're talking about consumers, but there's also the leadership of coffee bars who do have the ability to curate educational opportunities for their staff. And they have the ability to do what you're doing, and which is essentially acting as a supplement for what I think people assume they're going to get in a coffee shop, but don't necessarily get. Not in all shops, that's not true, but in many, many shops, it is true. What would you say to operators and owners about education and taking a page from your playbook in terms of looking into the not just facts but just practical knowledge of the science of coffee to help your baristas develop themselves professionally? How would you like for education to happen in the coffee bar so that a channel like yours can not be as much a supplement as it currently is?
This is just a problem in general with coffee shops in the U.S., and it's going to be something that's going to be very difficult to overturn. But it boils down to how people are running businesses with margins in mind. What people truly need is to invest in someone who is kind of the shop trainer, and not just someone that you're like, okay, you're now a trainer, here's an extra $1 an hour, but someone who is truly qualified to handle all of these things at an expert level, not just someone who's been a barista for 2 years and so they're qualified, but someone who is paid to continue their own education, because a lot of times people assume, and I've actually run into this many times, you're assumed to want to learn on your own without pay. And that's there are baristas who are passionate and they do it on their own time because it's a passion. But making that assumption as a business owner is, I think, ridiculous. It's incredulous. It should not be what's in mind. Instead, payment should always be hand in hand with expectations when it comes to related to the job. And so I think what people just need to be a little bit more, I guess, intense on their process of bringing on someone who is that trainer, someone who is going to be the one equipping their baristas. So you would be able to negate these supplements, the necessity of having an online tutor, essentially, if you were to be able to equip someone with the skill set and the drive to do all of this on their own. But like I said, it would require, a substantial increase in pay, and most shops are just not willing to do that. They want to rely on they don't think that it's necessary, essentially. But I would argue, I do wholesale for Onyx Coffee Lab, and I work with literally over 200 shops. And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, our most successful shops that are growing are the ones that have implemented a rigorous training element into their program. It's just reflected in their quality directly, and people notice it. And those are the places with the best Yelp reviews. Those are the places with the highest customer satisfaction. And those are the places also with the lowest turnover. And so it's something that I think a lot of people need to put into their agenda, I guess, is really making a more robust trainer. And I'm not advocating for a gatekeeping system where someone needs 2 years of training prior to touching the bar. But it is worthy to point out that there is a direct correlation, at least in my experience, of places that have an intense training program and places that are more, I guess, successful, that are just doing better overall with higher customer satisfaction, et cetera. So we actually have a training for trainers course that we offer through Onyx in order to allow shops to be kind of self-sufficient there, as opposed to relying on a roastery or relying on online training or anything like that. So,
well, it's interesting that you talk about the success of these shops and how many times the decision not to invest is based on the fear of the initial investment and the money you're going to spend and all of that stuff, but you get it back long term. And you're obviously, this is anecdotal to your experiences, but your experiences are pretty far-reaching, and I find that to be true as well. And to the point of having somebody requiring 2 years of experience or 3 years of experience and certifications, the better your training program in-house and the more tuned in it is, especially, the more likely you're able to get people that have promise but less experience, because you're going to train them and you know exactly what to train them in, and you've developed that. And so requiring all of that ahead of time sometimes is just a signal for, we don't have anything here. We're hoping that you bring it to us, and usually that just brings frustration because we're not going to respect that. We just want it. Okay, so we're talking about professional development, and it's no secret to anybody, especially with the gasoline put on the fire of consumers. Just getting into specialty coffee is already a big thing, but the pandemic really made it grow even more. The consumer market is a very serious market. It's something that I feel we need to pay a ton of attention to, more so than we are now. People have heard it on this show quite often, that investing in educating your consumers in your shop to have success with your coffee is probably the number one thing that you should be doing outside of taking care of your employees. But doing that for a lot of people means, again, to make educated decisions about, the things that they're going to be giving people to brew their coffee with at home on the retail shelf, right? So a lot of people just cobble together a bunch of stuff. None of the baristas know how to use it. Managers don't know how to use it. And so we need to have these educated decisions. And so when I watch your videos, obviously you put a lot of R&D into this stuff. There's a lot of your academic methodology that comes into play, no doubt. And so I want to just glean from you what maybe 2 or 3 things are, like just tools that you use to go through the process of selecting, quote unquote, the best or the right piece of equipment, grinder, espresso machine, brewer, or whatever it is. And maybe that we could use it in our coffee shops to make such decisions.
Yeah, so it's pretty, I would say overall it's kind of convoluted, because I follow just what I'm feeling at the time. But there is definitely a method to the madness. So one of the things that I rely on heavily is actually the contacts I've made in coffee of people who are much more qualified than I to speak on certain topics. So I frequently message Jonathan Gagne, the astrophysicist who's based up in Canada. We're good friends, and I run ideas and things by him frequently and make sure that I'm up to date on what he's working on. And so I run a lot of things by him. I also talk with Dr. Christopher Hendon up at Oregon, as well as Dr. Samos Smirka out in Zurich, Switzerland, just to ensure that whenever I'm pushing a thought, that I'm as above board as possible. I also utilize frequently those engineers I mentioned previously from the Espresso Aficionado Discord. Whenever I'm talking about equipment, I ensure I know what the heck I'm talking about by DMing a couple of them. There are a few in there who are legitimate engineers that, this is what they work on. So whenever I'm talking about voltage, wattage, things like that, there's one specific person I reach out to who's an electrical engineer. Anyway, so I have surrounded myself with people who are much more competent than I in specific areas in order to ensure that what I'm saying is not completely fabricated. On top of that, I do a lot of kind of data collection. So I do a lot of tasting, and I guess I'm trying to build myself as a dependable person with regard to my history in coffee and with tasting and coaching and competition. And so I do a lot of tasting, both blind and whatnot. And what I end up doing is I record myself with multiple hour sessions where I'm tasting, and I post the Zoom links on those videos where I do rigorous tasting so that there's accountability there. But I end up collecting a lot of data with refractometry and with tasting notes and everything else in order to ensure what I am presenting is consistent with my findings. I have my wife, swap up cups so that they're typically double blind because she has no idea what she's swapping, and then I have no idea what's going on, but I have them marked. Anyway, so I do a lot of testing and a lot of cross-referencing sources to ensure that everything I'm offering up is, as objective as subjectivity can be. But yeah, as far as like equipping a place with a grinder and with an espresso machine stuff, the first question I always ask people is, what are you looking for? And that's why I'm hesitant to ever truly land on quote unquote the ultimate this or the best that, because in reality, a lot of these things are specific to the person. Do you prefer workflow over functionality? Because that's a legitimate question. Do you prefer certain profiles over other as far as taste goes? Because those all cater to how you're going to be viewing my content. So for instance, I always have to make the declaration that what I look for in coffee is extreme clarity. I will sacrifice body and even some sweetness to get as much clarity as possible. I'm a tea head, and so that influences how I drink coffee greatly. And so, but I make sure people know that whenever I'm tasting, I can still taste more objectively than most and grade coffees that I don't necessarily love. But and we'll be able to give those notes as well. But yeah, I don't know if that even answers your question. But that's kind of
that's great. It makes me think about how the decision to bring in, speaking from a professional standpoint, the decision to bring in brewing equipment to sell to your customers or to recommend to your wholesale customers, and that they'll sell to their customers and so forth. And reasonably speaking, the baristas who work for you, and a lot of times, hopefully they're getting a little bit of a retail discount if they work for you, they're going to buy a V60 in filters from your shop, and they're going to try to brew your coffee at home too. And so the cafe is like this entry point for so many different things, related to professional development and consumers, continuing to develop their trust in what we serve them. And so that decision oftentimes is so last minute, and it is a pursuit of the best. And so we say, we have all the best brew gear. Well, and then we wonder why it's just collecting dust on the shelf. And because maybe it was, like you say, the pursuit of the best instead of what's right for you, because you're not thinking of the question of what do we value in taste? How do we want our customers to be experiencing this coffee? Even though we put tasting notes on the bag, oftentimes it's so mechanical the way we do it. It's not actually what we want people to taste. It's just what we tasted. So like, how do we go from the question of what's the best to what's right for our coffees and selecting the equipment based on that question instead of the knee-jerk, just get number one, the number one brewer, the number one this, and be done with it?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it, it's hard because, as a roaster, I don't want to dictate the experience of the person enjoying the coffee. So whereas I might want a specific thing out of a coffee, I don't want to necessarily dictate what someone else is getting out of the coffee. So, same thing with espresso, right? There's that opens up a whole avenue of different styles. So whereas we put on our website, recipes for everything, but that's a very myopic system in the sense that we're only doing like traditional style espresso on there, 1-2, 1-2.5, 1-3 ratios. And filter is always right around the 1-16 ratio. But, there are people who, prefer much bigger shots or much shorter shots of what we're offering. And so, far be it from me to negate that preference. Maybe someone really loves our coffees for ristretto, like a really truncated shot. I find that abhorrent, but I would never negate the legitimacy of someone else finding that beautiful. And so it really becomes a more difficult and convoluted game whenever all of those variables are introduced. So it's really about educating people on how to pursue what they're wanting. And that's why I think it's so important for someone to know more than just okay, this is how you pour an espresso. You just need to know how to do your job because that's all you're doing. In reality, you need to be able to talk on people's levels and understand what they're looking for in order to make proper suggestions. You know, that you're probably familiar, but that University of California at Davis, the Coffee Research Center, yes, they partnered with Breville on a study regarding brewer shape and how it affects extraction. And they concluded through a lot of testing that, you know, semi-conical versus flat, the semi-conical gives higher clarity, higher acidity, flat gives more sweetness, more body, which you would expect that just based off of, you know, intuitively looking at how extraction is going to happen through those two. But understanding even simple delineations like that is going to greatly impact a consumer's decision-making process in purchasing some sort of brewer. You know, if someone really wants that, you know, high clarity, high acidity, really complex, nuanced draught, you know, maybe you recommend some sort of conical device. Whereas if someone prefers that sweeter, you know, more chocolatey, full-bodied experience, maybe you recommend a flat bottom. And I know that's, you know, that's probably simplifying it over the top, but it's just an example as to the amount of effort that is needed in order to make a proper suggestion to a potential customer. It's a pretty intense process to really understand not only your coffees, but understanding what's the easiest way to brew, what's the most expressive way to brew based off of someone's I guess predilections.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're not asking the question for yourself, you can't really answer the question for somebody else.
Exactly.
What do you think is happening right now in the consumer market in coffee, and why should we pay attention to it professionally? I mean, what can we do to better embrace the customer's development as, a educated consumer, and one that in a lot of cases might even know more about coffee than we do? How do we embrace that effectively going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question, and one that I, consider daily, because the consumer market is changing, and it is changing rapidly. Since COVID hit, so many people became arduous home baristas, and it's become a passion of many. And so understanding that, and I'm sure you've had roasters on, or you've talked to roasters, and everyone experienced, not everyone, but a lot of roasters experienced a boom of a business for retail during COVID because everyone was brewing at home. And so as people began brewing at home and they were not happy with their results because they were used to their cafe experience, they began to kind of go on these deep dives of how to make coffee better. And now there are people diving so deeply that they're enjoying their coffees at home better than their local shops are making them. And it's because they've been able to tailor it to their preferences, whereas a shop kind of has to find a universal experience to share. People at home can tailor their coffee to what they would prefer. So although they may go to their local shop and their shop is pulling, something at like, we're going to get nerdy for a second and say they're pulling it at around a 9% TDS strength with around a 20% extraction, and the person really enjoys that. Perhaps they prefer a little more diluted espresso with a higher extraction, something like what would be called an Oolong. And so now they're at home pulling Oolongs, and they just prefer it. So they're buying that coffee shop's coffee, but they're never going to the shop itself because they're not enjoying how it's extracted there as much as they enjoyed at home. So understanding that the home market is growing at, I think, and this is just from my perspective, I think it's probably growing at a faster pace than cafe sales are growing. There's a need to understand at least as much to be able to help people get into it. So I don't think there's necessarily going to be like a drop off in cafe sales or anything like that. I think that's going to be a staple for years to come. But there's an increase in especially coffee consumption at home, so much so that it is important for roasters to be able to cater to the growing desires of education and of recipe building and of just desired knowledge from these home baristas. And, and what I've noticed is a lot of people are kind of still, they may be able to taste coffee and have their specific style of coffee, but they don't necessarily know how to recommend different styles of extraction to these home brewers, or how to really get in the nitty gritty of how to fix, maybe you have a roaster that's based, I don't know, so like in New York, let's say there's a roaster based in New York where the tap water is actually quite incredible, and they're working with a customer in LA where the tap water is 600 ppm or whatever it is, and maybe they don't have the requisite knowledge to help them get their water just right to extract the coffee well, because they've been, fortunate to use incredible water where maybe they only need to add a little bit of minerality. There's this growing need of help from home customers. The communications at Onyx has gone through the roof, and we've had to get more and more people on our comms team because we can't keep up with the home barista questions. It's ridiculous how many people, and it's not a negative thing. So if you're someone that's messaged Onyx and you're listening to this, I'm not annoyed. It's just, it's understanding that this is going to be a growing quickly field that roasters and shops need to be aware of in order to help people at home brew. So I think that's going to be a next thing, is understanding that it's okay to push people to brew at home. I don't think it's going to lose cafe sales. In fact, I think it'll probably bring people more in. It's just giving people an alternative to a daily cafe visit so that they can enjoy coffee at home as well. And so that's another big thing on my channel, is understanding that my overarching goal of all of this is to convert more people to specialty proper, not necessarily to go into coffee shops, but converting people to buying specialty beans, because that, I think, is the number one thing, is ensuring that we're getting money into the right avenues to affect change globally. I don't want people going out and buying commodity coffee. I want people going out and buying coffee where they're able to trace those funds back to origin. And something I always push people to do is ask your roaster what they're paying for their coffees, and if they can't tell you, well, then maybe buy coffee from a roaster who can. There's a lot more to all of this than just extracting 24% at home. There's you need to be buying coffee that's traceable, and I say that with everything in life. We need to be able to trace those materials back to where they're coming from. I think that's something that we need to look into, is understanding that the market is growing at such a ridiculous and probably unsustainable rate at home, that we need to be prepared and equipped to help people as they're traversing this new hobby, this new passion, and ensure that we are keeping up with their growing needs. I don't think serving these sour bombs of under-extracted espresso, which I still experience every time I visit a shop, I don't think that's going to be sustainable for much longer, as people are experiencing higher extracted, more evenly extracted, I should say, delicious espressos at home. Yeah, that's great. And really thankful that you have put the kind of work in to bridge that gap with your channel, and just in this conversation today, exploring this topic, it hopefully is going to jumpstart a lot of people's thinking down that path of really equipping people in a similar way that you have. And I completely agree with all you're talking about here. I don't think it's an existential threat to cafes. It's a great opportunity. And again, thankful for what you do in that field for sure. So where can we learn more about what's going on with you, your channel, and all that you're up to? Yeah, so everything is essentially under just my name, Lance Hedrick, Hedrick. There is no N, despite popular belief. The little joke I like to say is, and I feel pretty witty for saying this, so I hope people laugh at home. If not, just message me and said you laughed. People frequently misspell James Hoffman's name, and I call him Daddy Hoff, but people frequently misspell his name. His name is spelled Hoffmann. Mm-hmm. Typically, people leave off one of the N's at the end, and I tell people that N that they forgot on James Hoffman's name somehow finds its way in my name. Yes. So it goes from Hoffman, double N, to Hendrick. So anyway, so on YouTube, it's just Lance Hedrick, no spaces or anything. On Instagram, just Lance Hedrick, no punctuation. On TikTok, I think it's like Lance Hedrick. I just started that like 5 or 6 weeks ago, and I'm really weird on there. So if you want to see a more weird side of me than you see on YouTube, hop over there. I have a Facebook that's Lance Hedrick Coffee. I think that's it. Yes. Nice. For now. For now. Lance, really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much for this conversation. Really got a lot out of this. Absolutely. Thanks, Chris, for letting me indulge in multiple rants and hogging the mic. Excellent. Well, everyone, I hope that you enjoyed that episode with Lance. He made a lot of great points throughout this conversation, but being as we are typically mostly in the Keys to the Shop audience, that is,
professionals. His point about the need for us to invest into training for baristas and into the position of training and education in our shops is something that I think we really should meditate on and think about how we can take action on that. The fact that in his experience through Onyx as someone who deals with hundreds of different coffee shops, that the most successful ones are the ones who prioritize this in their coffee shops. It should not be something to gloss over. Lance has a considerable amount of experience, and I'll tell you from my own experience that it absolutely rings true, that when you invest into that kind of thing, you only increase your ability not only to have baristas who make great things, but also have the ability to help other people make great things too. And so that was one of the great things that we talked about today among many. I am so thankful again to Lance Hedrick for joining us on the show. Thank you so much, Lance. And if you are interested in what he is doing with his YouTube channel, follow him on Instagram at Lance Hedrick. And also, of course, his YouTube channel is Lance Hedrick. Just look that up on YouTube. We'll have links to all of this in the show notes, as well as recommended episodes for you to listen to after this that have to do with education and the consumer. And I think you would really get a lot from going through some of those episodes if you haven't listened to them already. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me about today's episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, feel free to email me. Chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can do that. And also, if you're interested in Keys to the Shop consulting, working with me to help you in your coffee business, you can use that same email to reach out. Chris@keystotheshop.com. By the way, I wanted to mention that Keys to the Shop is going to be having a very limited edition merch drop pretty soon on the website at keystotheshop.com. It's going to be a brand new thing for us. Never done any merch before, but this is a very beautiful Created Co. tumbler with a custom Keys to the Shop sunrise sunset design. It's a very nice product, and I hope you check it out. And who knows, we might do more merchandise in the future if this one is successful. So thanks for staying tuned for that. Now, something coming up pretty soon here, and the airing of this episode, it's going to be like under a week, is Coffeefest in New York. But Coffeefest is not just in New York. Coffeefest happens 4 times a year, every year, and it's been going on for 30 years. Now, what is Coffeefest? Coffeefest is a trade show that offers you what I think is probably the best resource for building a thriving coffee shop out there. There are free and accessibly priced lectures, workshops, and trainings from industry experts that you definitely can learn so much from. I'm one of those people that gets to speak at Coffeefest every year. Of course, there is the trade show floor with all of the wonderful vendors, and there's competitions like the Latte art competition that our friend Lance Hedrick won twice. There's cold brew competition and the coffee community that you get to rub elbows with like-minded enthusiasts and professionals. It's such an amazing event, and it's happening in New York this coming week, but also later in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Seattle. Go ahead and check them out over at coffeefest.com for more information and to register, and you can get 50% off your registration when you register using the code KEYS at coffeefest.com. Definitely remember to do that when you register. I hope to see you in one of these shows. Again, find out more information over at coffeefest.com. And with that is the end of our show today. Thanks, everybody, so much for taking the time to listen. I hope you got so much out of our conversation. Have an awesome day, and as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.